Welcome everyone. My name is Rob Jones. I'm one of the assistant ministers here at Christ Church Cathedral here on James Street North in Hamilton, Ontario. And thank you so much for joining us virtually at our Cathedral Chat. Cathedral Chats is a new initiative of this community, and what they are is just regular conversations on some of the most pressing issues facing our church and our society more broadly. We want to be a listening church so that we can better understand the world that we live in. And our hope is to engage topics that are of broad interest to the church, but to the wider public as well. So for the past few months, we've been having a range of conversations. We had conversations on truth and reconciliation, trees recognition, and the residential schooling system. Conversations on conspiracy theories and contemporary politics, homelessness and the housing crisis, and anti-racism in the church. And now we're so thrilled to have Sara here so that we can have a conversation around youth mental health. And so I just want to thank you all for being here. It's great to be able to host these conversations. So as we go on with this conversation, feel free to send in your questions via the YouTube chat, and we'll take some time towards the end of our night together to answer any questions that you send in. So I'll just briefly turn it over to Tim to introduce himself, and then I will introduce our guest, and then we can begin the conversation.
Technology, Rob, it's great when it works, eh? Anyway, my name is Tim Dobbin. I'm rector of the Cathedral here, dean of this diocese, and just a delight to be sharing with you, Rob, in this Cathedral Chats.
So we'll give our guest, Sara, a bit of time to introduce herself in the first question, but I'll just note that Sara is a family educator with the Youth Wellness Center at St. Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton. And she's a social worker doing some really important work with our youth here in the city. So I'll just turn it over to Tim, and he can get us going with the conversation.
Sure. Well, Sara, I'll tell you how this all came about. Was I have a friend who's a psychologist up at West Fifth, and I said we were interested in kind of having someone along to talk with us about youth mental health, and she recommended the Youth Wellness Centre, and so I inquired with someone there, and that's how kind of I ended up with your phone number and email address, and it was great. I mean, when we connected, I just had a sense that you were the right person for this evening, and it was kind of, I think you'd only kind of recently started when we connected 6 or so weeks ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. You come from a non-profit, Alternatives, I think you'd said, and you're now with the St. Joe's kind of healthcare network, the Youth Wellness Centre. So I guess I'm sure folk are really interested in knowing a bit more about you, and maybe how you kind of got into youth mental health as kind of a career path. Yeah, so anything along those lines, I'm sure folk would enjoy hearing about.
Yeah. So again, my name is Sara, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a registered social worker, and I work at St. Joe's at Youth Wellness Center. And I've been a social worker in the community in Hamilton for quite a long time, in some sort of capacity around public education and family support, around mental health and substance use disorders. And so what got me into the job, I was always quite interested in the idea of community, and so I wanted to be a community organizer. But I found myself in one of my very first jobs in Hamilton. Part of my job was to do that community piece, so to be providing education around mental health. But the other part was to do support and education for families who were dealing with serious mental illness. And that ended up being my favorite part of the job, connecting with people individually, which surprised me because I hadn't seen myself doing that kind of work. And the reason why I connected so much with that is that I was really able to see how just giving a little bit of support, guidance, and extra skills to families and caregivers makes a huge difference for the person who is experiencing mental illness. Like huge. The difference I was able to make was amazing. And also families were so grateful to have somebody listen to them and to offer them that support. I kind of use the term advanced caregiving skills because these are skills that I share with people that not every family or caregiver knows. They don't need to know. But when you have someone who you love who has mental health condition or has substance use disorder, these are things that are really helpful and really contribute to like moving that person forward. So I was able to see over the years how much a difference that made, and so that's what I've been doing ever since. I think since 2009, I started that role, and in some capacity, I've been doing family support ever since.
Wow, wow. So yeah, so that's like 13 years, huh? Yeah, coming on. So I'm interested, community organizer, Barack Obama was a community organizer, I think, before he went on to become president of the US. I mean, who knows where this is going to lead you, huh? But did did you have to go back and retool as a social worker to kind of go into this more specialized field of kind of a family support worker? Or did you have enough as a community organizer to do this as well?
No, I had to do a lot of learning.
A lot of, yeah, okay.
And I even sort of had to create a practice or create a lot of skills, because when I first started, there really wasn't that much in terms of family work.
You're probably right, eh? I mean, when you think back, maybe you're going back, I don't know, 15 years or so, there probably wasn't as much as there is today, huh?
No, and it was very grassroots. So the place where I first started working was very grassroots. I think I was, one of maybe 2 people employed in Hamilton, and a lot of the other people were peers, so like other families, and together we would run these groups. So there aren't a lot of people actually hired on to have a position of offering that family support. Actually at St. Joe's, I'm one of 2 positions in the whole hospital system of people who are employed specifically to be supporting families and caregivers around mental health. And when you think about all the things they're dealing with at home, right? When you go see your psychiatrist or psychologist or whoever, your mental health nurse, that's like an hour a month, an hour every several weeks, but you're at home with your family most of the time. And there's so much that families and caregivers can do. I think one of the myths and a lot of responses that families will get when they try and reach out for support is, sorry, that there isn't really anything you can do unless the person wants help. So unless you're working with somebody who's really motivated, unless your family member's really motivated and has lots of insight, it feels like, wow, like I'm really stuck, there's nothing I can do. I don't believe that at all. I think there's actually so much families can do, even more than the professionals can do. Just with some extra skills, with a bit more support, just knowing the things that help can make a huge difference. And so yeah, it's a unique position, and I really feel like I've been able to carve out this, these strategies for families that I can really stand behind, that I know make a difference.
That's great. That's great. So yeah, maybe that's a great time to transition to talking about some of the work that you're doing now. So you're at the Youth Wellness Center with St. Joe's. It's a pretty new position for you, but could you talk a little bit about the Youth Wellness Center and the type of work that it does?
Yeah, I'll explain the program because it's a really cool program and it's really unique. So St. Joe's is an outpatient mental health program for youth ages 17 to 25. And so we're not in the hospital, which is one of the most important pieces, is that we're not like up at West 5th or at Charlton. We're in the community. And it, when it was designed, it was really designed for and by youth. So we actually have a youth council, which helps make decisions around how, even just like how the space looks, how reception works. We have a TV, so like what kinds of shows they play when you're sitting in reception. All of these things are geared towards youth. So Youth Wellness Center has 3 streams, and the stream that is open to the community is the early intervention stream. And then there's also a transition stream and a mobile team stream, which are physicians or professionals refer to those, but for the EI stream, the early intervention stream, anyone in the community can refer to that. If the youth is within our age range, 17 to 25, and is in the early stages of a mental health condition or struggling with their mental health. And the idea is to offer kind of quick, like youth-focused mental health treatment that's like evidence-based, and try and reduce the disruption that any of the mental health symptoms are having on that young person. So, we want to intervene before there's a disruption in school and work and relationships, and like they're on a trajectory. And mental health can really put a wrench in that. So the whole point behind EI is to try and offer low barrier services as quickly as possible, and really help that youth kind of like get on their way. Right. And so how we do that is through like a bit of an assessment with a mental health nurse, and then they make recommendations about where else. We have lots of options for youth, kind of like a menu depending on what the youth needs, but there's a lot of like groups that youth participate in to gain skills around things like emotion dysregulation or anxiety or ADHD or any of the things that are concerning them. And then we also have access to occupational therapy and psychiatry and psychology. I think the most unique and interesting thing about Youth Wellness Center, well, there's two things that I love. One is that they have several peer mentors, which are people who are hired, and they have this, like, they have a lived experience, and they're hired to be offering that kind of support from that lived experience perspective. And then the other thing that's really important about Youth Wellness Center is we specifically have programs that are geared towards queer and trans youth, Black youth, Indigenous youth, and racialized youth. Because we know that trauma associated with racism, racial trauma, and trauma associated with, transphobia has a huge impact on youth. And these are also things that are really important to us, is providing those services from that perspective, really targeting those needs too.
Yeah, that's great.
So it's quite, some of your interventions are quite specialized then, right? It's particularly important, I think, for us here in that, as I think I mentioned, that some dearly beloved parishioners lost a granddaughter to suicide just shortly before Christmas, and Charlie was transitioning. So we're particularly interested, I think, in resources that are out there for families that are struggling with some of these issues. I'm really interested. Often when we think of kind of interventions, we think of individuals, don't we? We think of like if there's a youth with mental health issues, we think, well, it's all about focusing on the youth. Whereas what you seem to be saying to us is actually kind of a systems-based approach, like seeing being able to work with the family system is a way in which we can kind of use the family as a resource to be able to support the youth in terms of what he is going through, huh? Yeah,
that's right. And I think that's particularly important in a youth-centered care, right? So that's why it's different from adult mental health care, right? When you go into the adult system and you're going to your outpatient program at St. Joe's, it's specifically geared towards your mental health condition. But Youth Wellness Center acknowledges that their youth lives are so complex, and there's so many ways that we can be targeting that and offering support. So that includes caregivers too, right? Like normally in the mental health system, caregivers aren't really involved, or your family is not really overly involved. You might get some time with a psychiatrist or about a treatment plan, that sort of thing, or with a social worker. But my job is to actually collaborate with families to try and reinforce some of the things that the youth are learning in group, and reinforce that at home to see how can you actually help out with some of these skills, and really reinforce positive mental health at home is huge, hugely important. So not all of the, I don't see all of the families of all of the youth, because they don't all have families who are involved or who have the capacity to be involved, and that's fine. But there's a lot that I do see that have some openness, and even just a couple of tweaks or changes at home can make a big difference for youth. So I want to say that it's really hopeful if you care for somebody who's struggling with their mental health, substance use, if you care for a youth who's trans, being there for, like, your role in their life is very important. Any adult role in their life is very important. Yeah.
And what you're saying is a little can go a long way.
Absolutely.
Right, that it might be just what might seem like a little tweak in terms of how the family functions together, but just can pay huge dividends further down the track. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I guess one of our wonderings is, if we kind of pull the lens back a bit, is what we kind of understand by mental health.
Yeah.
And what some of the factors out there, and I think you've touched on something, right? But what some of the factors that there are out there that might kind of impact mental health for youth, right?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. Mental health is something that we talk a lot more about now. So we hear about it a lot.
Especially during a pandemic, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And, our understanding of it is growing too. And so, how I understand mental health, we all have experiences of like positive mental health or negative mental health. Like we all struggle at sometimes. Mental health is not necessarily dependent on whether you have a mental health diagnosis or not. It's important, and your experience is valid, and needs to be addressed. It requires some support, deserves some support. So mental health, we really see it as this balance between our emotional health, our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors, and then how we're able to deal with everyday stressors, and then how our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are interacting with our life, right? So the way that our mood is preventing us from doing the things that we want to do, or anxiety preventing us from doing the things we want to do. These are all the things that we're looking at with mental health, particularly with adolescents. And so you can have a diagnosis of a mental illness and still have positive mental health. You can have good mental health, and vice versa. You can, have never been diagnosed with a mental illness before and be struggling with your mental health. And so at any stage, at any rate, diagnosis or not, there's, supports are important. Your family support is really important, and just, having your needs met is hugely important. So yes, during the pandemic, we've seen such an increase of people struggling with their mental health.
Really spiked, hasn't it?
Huge, huge. And youth are really struggling. Adults are really struggling. Parents are really struggling. Everyone's really struggling. Because the things that we normally do to help with our mental health, to balance our emotions, thoughts, behaviors, and take care of ourselves, haven't been accessible. They haven't been there. And community has been hugely missing. And we know that, when somebody is experiencing mental health, like the medication that they take is just such a small part of it. The other part that's really important is community and connection and relationships, and all of those things have been missing. And so yes, youth have really been struggling. Parents have been really struggling. Community members have been really struggling. So, no one's alone in this. You're not alone. Yeah,
I think it's important to note that mental health struggles is something that youth, adults, seniors, it's something that people of all generations and demographics experience. And so maybe you could say a little bit more about the particularities of the youth experience, and what are some of the particular challenges that youth face that we have to think about when we think about youth mental health.
So youth are actually much more susceptible to experiencing concerns around their mental health than any other age group. And they're also the least likely to be reaching out for help and getting help. So here's why youth are more vulnerable. Part of it is brain development, so adolescent brain development, and sort of what's happening in their brain at that time that sometimes makes them more susceptible. Things like hormones, things like life events, and regular milestones that end up being stressors, and even happy milestones like getting into university or getting a car, getting your first job, having your first like serious romantic relationship, all of those things are good stressors, but they're also stressors. And so, if you're susceptible to something like anxiety or depression, then these life stressors come up, and they can result in like a worsening of that experience of anxiety or depression. And so some of it is like normal adolescent milestone stuff, and some of it's brain development, and a lot of it is just the experience of kind of a youth life right now. Like their lives are so much different than maybe ours were at that age too, right? Life is different, and so we can't compare. They have a lot of pressures, a lot of social pressures, and right now, like not a lot of access to the kinds of things that fill your cup back, right? Not a lot of the things that help. So we know that the adolescent age is around the time of early onset, right? So if you're predisposed or if you're susceptible to having a mental health condition, that's probably going to be the age when you're going to start to see signs and symptoms, is that age between like 17 to 25. And so, it's another reason why we need to pay attention. We need to watch and be there and really hear young people when they're struggling, really listen and really take that seriously and validate. Not everyone struggling with their mental health at this time is going to go on to develop a mental illness or a mental health condition. They're not all going to need medication. And sometimes that can be, I think, like concerning or scary for caregivers to think, if we go to the doctor, they're just going to get medication, they're just going to give them meds. It's definitely a holistic approach is best, but taking it seriously and just, really validating it, finding a way to connect with that young person and offer that support is key.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I'm just kind of thinking, Sarah, that I guess the adage, a stitch in time saves 9, kind of applies here in some ways. That I'm so thankful that you are where you are, is that kind of the earlier we can intervene, the sooner we can teach skills, which may kind of prevent or lessen the chances of kind of bigger problems further down the line, eh?
Yes, that's why, that's why our program is about early intervention, right? Because it is true that the earlier you can offer the supports before there's a disruption in their life, really that's the key, right? Before they, they're struggling at school or they're having big conflicts in relationships or family relationships. That being said, it's not that easy because we're talking about adolescents. And, when I mentioned this piece around brain development, their brains think much differently than adult brains. And so it is true that youth struggle with motivation sometimes, and it is true that youth are the least likely group to be accessing mental health supports. And so have patience, but know that it's not a failure. If you have a young person who's struggling and they're struggling and you want them to get help, know that you're not a failure if you're struggling to get them there. That's normal, that's part of it. We have to hold on and continue to be there for that person, and have that hope for them.
What are some of the ways I'd be interested to know that you kind of encourage engagement, right? That you get folk to actually access your resources, and not only access your resources but actually kind of put them into practice. So that's probably kind of one of the bigger challenges in your role, huh?
So your question is kind of around increasing engagement. Is that what you're saying? Getting them bought in, getting them to buy in and getting them involved. That's a huge hurdle for adolescents. And relationship is key. The relationship that you have with that young person is probably the most important piece of the puzzle. And if there's conflict and if you're struggling with your relationship, that's okay, because this is hard, right? And you can make it better, right? You love them and you care about them, and that's the first starting point. And and it's hard. So sometimes it's about, taking care of yourself so that you can show up for them with lots of patience. Sometimes the key to improving that relationship is through validation, like deep validation. Like, I know this is hard for you, and I know, you're struggling, and I know you want to do better, right? One thing that really helps with adolescents is, as adults, again, we have this like adult brain. We want to problem solve and we want to fix. So we hear that something's going on and we're like, well, let's get them into this program right now, or let's call this person, let's call the family doctor. That doesn't usually work that well for adolescents. So before we do any of those things, we're trying to connect. We're trying to say, thank you for telling me that. That means a lot that you trusted me with that. What you said is really important, right? We don't want to forget to just work, go back to the relationship that you have and that connection, and then, you can jump forward. Like, getting help is scary, right? When someone says to you, like, well, this is a problem and you need to go get help, like, that's so scary. So we have it's okay to have a bit of patience. Like we said, like, early intervention is key, and at the same time, we want to hold somebody's hand through it, and we want to have patience and kind of not jump ahead and if that person's really not ready.
So it's a bit like what Rob and I might find in ministry here. Relationship is primary, right? I mean, the currency of the church in many ways is relationship, and so too in your position, it's about building relationship and gaining trust. One of the jobs that I had before, part of my role was to support people with lived experience to tell their story of recovery from mental illness. And so often when someone would ask, like, what did your family do, or what really helped you? It usually isn't that they usually don't say it was like medication or it was a therapy group. They say, like, it was when my mom made me herbal tea in the night when I couldn't sleep, or like when my dad watched a funny movie with me, or like when my grandma took me to Tim Hortons or whatever. Those are the things that usually they say were really helpful. So again, like this relationship piece, like mental health treatment, yes, we need to get them into treatment somehow. However they want to accept it, that's good. And like, we got to have relationship. And we got to know that the little things that we do really help, and that's what youth need. And those are little things, like making someone a cup of tea, or going to watching a movie with somebody, or taking someone to Tim Hortons. I mean, that's not rocket science, is it? Yeah. And what you're saying is that kind of stuff makes a difference. It does.
I think the word intervention can be so loaded or intimidating to people, right? And so it sounds like what interventions look like can vary from person to person. And so maybe just say a little bit more about, like, I think you've given us some really helpful examples already, but what are some of those, early interventions? What does it look like? Maybe if there are any stories that help kind of communicate that.
Okay. So again, like the word intervention, like it's a word that we use and when we basically say like a strategy or a skill or a tool. It isn't anything forceful. Like sometimes when people think of intervention, they think of that awful show on TV.
Surprise,
where you bombard somebody and then you tell them all the ways that they should feel guilty and then they have to go to residential treatment or something. That's not what I mean by intervention at all. It's so much more of a collaborative approach. It's getting a sense of what that person's willing to start with. And so some good starts are like a family doctor. A good start would be just talking to another adult that you trust. So if you are concerned about somebody and they don't want to talk to you, try and find out who they do trust and who they will talk to. Any adult is fine. Reaching out to some of the community programs, but the person, there needs to be some buy-in and there needs to be choices too, right? So some of the choices, like here, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. But I think before we do any of those steps, it's better listening. It's really good listening, deep listening, trying to understand and really offering that person like empathy and validation. Yeah, which sometimes seems so counterproductive. Like, you know, we're afraid that if we validate something that we're reinforcing it, right? If we're validating somebody having lots of feelings of self-doubt, a young person's having all these feelings of self-doubt, we want to say, you can do it. Of course we do. I say that to my kids too. But the advanced caregiving skill would be to say something like, I know you feel that way, and that's really hard. And just sitting with that, which is really uncomfortable for us because we want to fix it. We want to go in and fix. So, you know, I do think it can be really powerful though to sit with somebody, and we call it like holding space in that place of discomfort for a little while before we do the problem solving piece. But just really to acknowledge that a person's experience is valid, even if we don't see it that way. So of course I might look at my kid and be like, of course they can do it. I believe in them, I love them. I want to hold space for that feeling somewhere deep within. And that's how we can actually improve somebody's motivation. So it doesn't make them feel more like depressed. It doesn't make them feel more anxious. It actually like opens up an opportunity to know that that's a feeling that I'm feeling and I can feel better.
Almost giving them permission to feel what they're feeling.
Yeah. And so a lot of our mental health services at Youth Wellness Center, offer skills around, knowing, naming emotions and naming thoughts, because those are skills that we don't all have already, a lot of us. So, I do too think it's so cool and encouraging to see youth learning these things and engaging in all of that information and know that the possibility for change is so awesome. Yeah, and I think that's also the difference between adolescent and mental health and adult mental health, right? Is that like their capacity for change is huge. Their capacity for learning, the way that their brains are wired for learning, is a huge benefit for them too.
In terms of, and you may have touched on this already, Sarah, just kind of particular needs of youth today, and maybe here in Hamilton as well. I mean, you're kind of really on the coalface.
Okay.
What kind of needs are you seeing, kind of that are primary or emerging?
Okay. So, we see a lot of anxiety, we see a lot of depression, and so they're needing like specific treatment around like anxiety or depression or managing those, proper assessment. So sometimes a family doctor can do that, and sometimes, it's about going beyond that and getting a proper assessment. Youth are needing community, they're needing help socializing and getting back into the world and knowing how to be. That's a big thing. They need trans-affirming healthcare. They need healthcare that acknowledges racial trauma, and they need clinicians and professionals who can hold space for that and speak to that. That's a hugely important thing for youth. They need to be heard. They need to be validated. Yeah, we truly are seeing that youth are struggling a lot because of the pandemic. So many things have been taken from them, and because too of like the way that their brain works. The things that are going on now feel so permanent, right? Those of us who are going through life right now as adults have the ability, we have some life skills behind us, and we have the ability to see how things can change, things can get better, and things don't last forever. But the adolescents haven't had that experience, and so many of them really are struggling. And I think it's really important that mental health be a topic at home, be something that gets talked about. If you're feeling uncomfortable with it, if the caregiver's feeling uncomfortable with it, get some support. Sit with that. There's parent support groups in the community, which I can speak to, which help with that. They do need adults who have some knowledge and capacity to cope and to deal with it so that they can too.
Well, that's a really helpful point, maybe to kind of bring this conversation to a close. I think if I imagine who might be watching this video, I think concerned parents and grandparents in our church and beyond. I'm thinking of volunteer youth workers who work closely with youth in our diocese and our parishes. So what resources are available to adults who have young people in their lives that they care about, and you know, where would you kind of suggest people look or begin when they're thinking about resources that can help them navigate these issues?
St. Joe's has a family resource center where they have someone there who you can talk to. I think during the pandemic you have to call in advance just to make sure that someone's going to be there, but that information can be found through the St. Joe's website. There's another really great group called Parents for Children's Mental Health, and they have a Hamilton chapter. And they not only run meetings, but they do peer support. So you can have a phone call with another parent who's going through something similar and has something to offer, some support to give and some skills to share. So that's key too. If your family is really struggling and you really need to know what to do and you really need help, I find that COAST, so the Crisis Outreach and Support Team in Hamilton, can be a good resource for caregivers actually, even if the young person who's potentially in a mental health crisis doesn't want that service for themselves. Caregivers can call and just ask for some information, ask for some advice. What should I do in this moment? That can be really helpful too. Connecting to your own supports as best you can. Like a lot of the caregivers I speak to also have a therapist that they speak to. Awesome, everyone should have a therapist if you have the access to. And if you don't, connecting to someone that you trust, who maybe has been through something similar. Getting your own support, huge. Yeah, and so support's out there. I certainly can't take on every single person in Hamilton. However, if I do take phone calls from people in the community. If they're looking for specific information, I can share information. I've done that, in every presentation. I've offered myself up to do that, because I think it's important, and it's information that it feels like it's really hard to find sometimes, right? Especially if you're coming across that piece around, well, there's nothing you can do until they want help. I think we should be sharing that information with each other about what can be helpful.
Yeah. It's so important to destigmatize these conversations and to destigmatize talking about mental health, and so even the suggestion that adults be seeking out people that they can talk to themselves. I think all of us attending to our mental health is really important.
That's huge, right? And I sometimes say you can't ask a youth to do something you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. So find yourself whatever kind of therapy you have access to. So even in our community, they have geared to income therapy through Catholic Family Services, and so you can access your own counselor there. And that also demonstrates to a young person that it's not a big deal. Everyone should get support when they need it, and here I'm going to do it too, and here's how I'm going to take care of myself so that I can show up better for you.
Well, this has been a really rich and thoughtful and helpful conversation. Sara, I just want to thank you on behalf of our parish for taking some time out of your busy schedule just to sit down with us. It's been really informative, and I think it's going to be a really great resource for lots of people in our community.
Yeah, thank you, Sara. I'm especially grateful. I'm a newcomer to Hamilton. When I say newcomer, I've been here just over a year. And it's just wonderful to know there's somebody out there, right, that's working in this field and has got her fingers on the pulse in terms of resources. And so it's going to be great for me to know as a parish priest that there's the Youth Wellness Centre and there's Sara McAuley there, who can kind of direct us if we need direction. So thank you. It's been a really helpful conversation. I think especially now.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Hope you enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, have a great evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Eduardo.